Go. So my name is Jeff McCullough from Memphis, Tennessee. And Mike, are you here with us?
I am. I'm Mike Dorsey.
Right.
I'm from St. Louis, Missouri.
And we better get off this screen quick because we want them to stay around for the session. So a couple things here about just big picture things before we get into strategies, which we're going to dive deep into, is changing the landscape of high-stake testing. So I'm sure some of you have heard this term test optional. So a lot of more colleges are actually going test optional, which makes you think, well, hey, maybe these ACT and SATs are not going to be around for very long. I mean, can you believe how many of these colleges are actually test optional now, Mike?
No, I had some students last year who were taking AP Calc, and they were kind of wondering why they should take the AP test and why should they bother taking the ACT also, because they were applying to test optional schools.
Yeah. So what is test optional? So it has usually, and there's no set definition, but usually means that you're not placing them academically because of that. Maybe it's required only for out of state. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes if your class rank is not met, they would only use the ACT or SAT in that situation. Or only certain programs, like engineering programs, or only certain programs might require the ACT or SAT. So it's not mandatory for everyone. That's the idea of this test optional. Now, what's interesting is you might think, well, test is going away, but I always feel like California is a trendsetter. A lot of those schools out there, not just with fashion, but also with just a lot of things. And University of California did a very big study. They paid for this. And so for all the California schools, they decided that there were two big results from the big survey they did. And one of them is that the test, the ACT and SAT do help identify candidates who will be successful. And they said even in underrepresented populations, it helps with admission. So in other words, rather than using GPA alone, it is better if they use ACT and SAT. And what that tells me is that these tests are going to be around for a while. But this new, this only bolsters college to say, hey, we're going to keep using these in some way, somehow, maybe just for scholarships, but also I think sometimes for admission. And did you hear about this other change, Mike, that's going on, this individual section retesting?
Yeah, so that was a huge announcement back in October. You used to have to take the whole ACT anytime you wanted to try and improve a score, even on one test. Starting next October, students will be able to take individual tests. So they will have had to have taken a whole ACT prior, but after that, they could just go in and say retake their math test or retake their reading test if that's all they want to improve. But this is computer-based testing only, so students I've talked to aren't excited about taking computer-based tests. And
right. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So then, like it says, it's going to be faster scoring, and ACT is going to be reporting super scores now, which is when they average your highest score on any time you take the test. But my big question is, how are universities going to be responding to that? Because there are several, but not many, that do accept a super score. But I'm curious to find out who's going to be changing and accepting those.
I mean, you would expect that more universities will start super scoring. I mean, that's kind of their hope anyway, that maybe in October that will happen. We'll see what happens there. And the test information release is the last big picture information we have for you, which is, as a teacher, you should know this, that there are 3 tests, April, June, and December, that they do release the test. You have to pay $22 extra if you take the test to get this test back, but you actually get the test questions back. Do your students do this, Mike, when they take one of these test dates? Do you do this?
Definitely. I encourage a lot of my students to, especially like their junior year, to shoot for that December test date as their first time of taking the test. And I've had so many parents and so many even guidance counselors who've never heard of this program. They're like, how long have they been doing this? It's like, they've been doing it a while.
Yeah. So that's a great thing to do. If you take one of those tests, definitely pay the $22, get your test back. You know which questions you missed. As a tutor, you can go through it with them. It's really nice information to get. Okay, so now we're on to strategies. And like I said, we're going to dive into strategies. And sometimes, even on one problem, we may do multiple strategies, multiple different ways of doing things. And I think it's really good for students to have a bunch of strategies in their back pocket to go, hey, if I don't know how to do it, maybe I could try this. Because sometimes students will just give up on a problem. If they don't have any other strategies, they just, I don't know what to do. But this one's kind of an interesting idea, is that, because only do as much work as you need to get the correct answer. In my math class, that's not my mantra. Is it your mantra in your math class, Mike?
I'm trying to change my ways where, hey, there's lots of ways of doing a math problem, not just the way that I show you. And I try to really encourage them to be clever. I think that was one thing that somebody taught me a lot about the ACT. He says cleverness is rewarded on the ACT.
Huh. Yeah. So, and this is what I think of as a test prep strategy. In other words, we just want to get the answer and get out of there. We're not trying to show off our math skills to our math teachers here. We're trying to get the answer as fast as we can. A couple ways we do that is maybe glancing at the answers. The answers are right there for us. Sometimes it helps us. Eliminating wrong answers is such a great technique, but I want my students to start doing it. I love when I start seeing them put slash marks through the wrong answers. Being an analytical thinker is great on these tests. And like Mike, like you say, just kind of estimating things sometimes. Sometimes you can just eliminate answers by doing some estimation.
And I really getting them used to writing on tests too, because a lot of times when you take a test, they say, don't write on this.
Yes. So by the way, if all these questions are being provided to you in a link, part of the resources here. And so if you've printed this out, please write on this. That's what we want you to do. This is a basic question that says, hey, just kind of analyze this. And so even before we do this question, what is similar about the answers? Sometimes I'll ask students that, like you might notice maybe all of them are negative in this case. 3 of them have 8s in front of them. Some of them have, they'll have X's and Y's and so forth. Just kind of like glance at the answers. And what I might think about is doing the numerical value first. So if you know how to simplify 56 divided by 7, go ahead and do that. And so right away, man, I've already gotten 2 of the 5 answers out of the way. It's just great to be able to eliminate bad answers.
And this is also a place where I look at problems like this and I say, if you do probably half of the question or 2/3 of the question, you'll eliminate all the bad answers. You don't have to do the whole problem if you take a peek at those answers while you're working.
Yeah. It's a great point. So maybe you don't even know how to do negative exponents. You see that x to -1, you go, I don't know how to do that. So maybe look at the variable y. Maybe you know how to do y cubed divided by y to the first, and you go, well, I think that's y squared. So that eliminates those answers, and I don't even know how to do x, but x to the -1, and I know how to do this problem. So it's a great point. You don't necessarily have to know how to do everything to get a problem right if you're good at eliminating. And even just a point on this very first question, the distractors, all of the wrong answers have at least some part of the right answer in them. Like, isn't that kind of interesting?
Totally.
C and D have 8.
Yeah, it's fun to look at the wrong answers, and sometimes they're just crazy, but sometimes you can see what the test writers are up to and try in terms of get us or whatever.
Sure. So number 2, we have this problem. It's not too tough, but yet I think students will fall prey to a distractor here, I think, in some cases. So I always think, read the question, get it lay of the land, and then eliminate some that you might see. And so like on this one, when it says negative means a drop in temperature. Clearly, it got colder as Katie was sleeping, so 36 to -8. So really, any of these positive answers should be eliminated immediately. And that's important because you notice some of them are the opposites of one of the correct answers here. So when you type it in your calculator, it's very likely you just type it in like this and get 44. And of course, the correct answer is negative 44. But you protect yourselves when you eliminate those obvious wrong answers when you do a question. So I think that's part of the reason we eliminate it. It protects you. Do you agree with that, Mike?
Absolutely.
So here's the third question. Right triangle shown. What's the cosine of theta? Not bad. Now notice there's a missing side here. But even before we find that missing side, go on the information that's been given. What do you know about the answer? And so if you know how to do cosine, you know you're going to divide by the hypotenuse there. Therefore, really there's only two answers this could be. So just if you know that, you don't even have to necessarily calculate that third side. Although, Mike, do you tell your students you should know two triangles, the 3, 4, 5 triangle, and what's the other one that they should know?
Yeah, 5, 12, 13, and 3, 4, 5, those Pythagorean triples, and then also their multiples, I almost guarantee will be on the test every time.
No doubt. I mean, if you meet one of those triangles on the street, get their autograph. They're super famous. They're going to be on the test somewhere, somehow. And so in this case, you don't necessarily have to do the work to find the 5, especially if you knew that it's 5, 12, 13, and you can get it. So find stuff as fast as you can. I thought this kind of question is really interesting, especially when I looked at the answers. Sometimes it surprised me how many answers can be eliminated right away. Like without even actually figuring out the area of each of those triangles first, I just kind of looked at this and estimated, like, is it more than half or less than half? And if you draw the line in there, you can kind of see, like, the shaded area looks to me to be clearly less than half. Maybe on the right side it's exactly half, but on the left-hand side it's less than half of the shaded region there. And all of these are more than half that I crossed out, so the answer must be C. C is the only one that's below half. And so sometimes you can get the answer without doing all the work, just by eliminating the wrong answers.
And I think this is the kind of problem that if you do that test information release, you might see one on a subsequent test that looks really close to this, and they might just change a little bit because they do reuse problems.
Good point. I mean, and I'd say a lot of these problems we picked, of these 25 problems, a lot of these are popular problems that we picked that you'll see again and again on some of these tests. Which answers can you eliminate? So again, think about before you even answer the question, let's get rid of the really bad ones. Like some of these, like if you double 4 and 4, you've already got at least 8 feet, and this is only 7 feet. So to me, there's about 3 answers here that really you have no business guessing those answers. Those are just bad answers. And so at this point, now you're not worried about the 3 feet. You're just going to double 8 inches or 9 inches and see what that comes to. And so if you only double 9 inches, that's 18 inches, which of course is 1 foot plus 6 inches, and that would have to be the answer. But you can see how, you think about how tempting 8 is, because 8 inches double is 16. It's easy to think, without thinking about a foot is really 12 inches, not 10 inches, that it's a very tempting distractor right there. But again, just getting limited to the other answers will help you pay attention to those distractors and maybe figure it out, hopefully, when you get there. Which answers can you eliminate here? So we have, this is kind of a theoretical question. You have A, B, and C. A is a little bigger than B. B is bigger than C. Oh, but this is a little twist. B is smaller than 0, which essentially means, I guess, C is also smaller than 0. So B and C must be negative, and A might be positive here. So which of these statements must always be true? So, Mike, I don't know if you do this. I usually will substitute numbers in for a problem like this. Is this what you do?
Absolutely. So I usually try to keep to simple numbers, and I even tell students to try to use prime numbers if possible and stay away from.
That's an interesting strategy. Yeah, use prime numbers. I like that.
Yeah.
So I didn't use prime numbers here, but 3, -1, and -2 were my A, B, and C choices. And notice here, I found these first 2 statements, at least for these numbers, to be true, but I definitely found 3 as false. So when you have a false one, you can definitely, I see 3 over there, 3, 3, C, D, and E are out at that point. And so now I'm just trying to figure out, is it A or is it B, because they both can't be true all the time. That keyword there is always be true. Sometimes they're both true, but not always. And so what I do is I just pick a new set of numbers. Is that what you do, Mike, also?
Totally. And with the word always, sometimes they'll use the word must also. And I teach students to circle or underline those words because they're super important.
Oh, it's great. Annotating is great for this test. So definitely underline the word always there. And you see that now one is false, so the answer must be B at that point. Sometimes with these logic type problems with the Roman numerals, sometimes you don't have to answer all of them. You can eliminate a lot of answers really quickly just by figuring out one or two of the different situations there. For this one, I thought we might take a second for the chat window. So there's a number of participants here. How could you do this in your calculator? So in the chat window, Mike, would you kind of monitor that and tell me what people are saying for how could you use your calculator to actually just solve this problem in your calculator? So if you go to the chat window, please type your answer to that if someone has an answer to that question. How could you, number 7 here.
Somebody
just did it in my head. That's funny. I like that, Belinda. And of course, you know that always on these tests, a -3 is going to be, you're going to square a negative number somewhere in this test. That's really what they're doing. So I'd use a table.
And then Y1, use the table.
So store -3, so you could use the stow command.
Any other ideas?
If anybody's having any trouble finding their chat window, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a floating message bubble. You can click on that, and that might open your chat panel. And remember, send it out to all participants so that everybody, including your presenters, can see your comments and your questions. Thank you.
Somebody said it has to be
positive. I like that. So I'm going to show you a couple ways. And one of the things, and again, this is being recorded. So these keystrokes will be listed on the webinar. But on TI-Nspire, you can stow the variable by hitting Control Variable. And that gives you this little arrow here. And so you can say -3 stow as X. And that will store it, and then you can just type the expression as it is, and it gives you the answer of 45. On TI-84, if you can, there's actually a hip-hop key in the calculator. It's the stow key, and because in hip-hop language you don't say store, you say stow it. And so again, you can hit -3 stow X, and on 84 you can also get the same answer of 45. So it will plug in a negative number with parentheses essentially, and get you the answer by storing. You could also use the such that command. So this command is specific to the TI-Nspire only. And so it's kind of a neat thing. You can hit Control equals, and this little 6 squares come up, and you choose the vertical bar in the bottom right corner. So after you type the expression, put the such that command, the vertical bar, and then type in X equals -3. And that will also give you the answer of 45. And I really like that way in Nspire of just kind of having students check their work and plug in their answers very quickly, substitute their answers in very quickly. Mike, do you ever use that in your class?
Not so much. I'm dealing with my students are sometimes struggle with more of the concepts on the ACT, so I go with more simpler methods. And so I just say, go ahead and use the number and put in parentheses and evaluate the question rather than even
so if you use parentheses correctly, you can just type it in. Of course, a lot of students type in -3 squared without using the parentheses there.
And that's what the test writers are looking for.
Right. And on TI-Nspire, you could also graph this and then use the trace command. So menu, trace, graph trace. And then when you're in trace mode, you can actually just type the number -3 and press enter, and it will show you on the graph and also show you the ordered pair, and 45 is the Y value, and so it gives you the answer that way. It works the same way on 84, except there's a trace key that you hit after you graph it. Type the number -3, press enter, and it jumps to that point on the graph and shows you the Y value of 45. So really kind of another representation, but kind of a visual way of substituting a value into a function, which is kind of neat in a way. I kind of like seeing the representation of the graph there.
And I think
I do want to mention, yeah?
Sorry, I was say I think this shows just kind of all the different kinds of ways that you can approach a problem, and we're just trying to figure out one way to connect with students to find something that makes sense to them.
Yeah. And one thing you have to be careful of when you're on the 84, not so much on Nspire, is you're limited to your window. So if your X value is from -10 to 10, then you can only trace a value from -10 to 10. So if you were trying to enter a value like 15 in your 84, you would have to change your window first and then trace to that value.
Ooh, there's Craig says enter Y1 and then do Y1 of -3.
That's a great way. Yeah, use function notation. So let me show you what that would look like. So if you go to Y1 and you type in 2x squared minus 9x on an 84, and then to type in Y1, you'd hit alpha trace and choose the Y1 there, and then parentheses and type in -3. Kind of like function. It looks kind of like function notation, really. And press enter, and you get the answer of 45. And very similar on an 84, if you typed in 2x squared minus 9x, that's f1 of x. So if I add a calculator page, so I go home and hit the calculator page and type in f1 of -3, it really does look like function notation now. And it will substitute that in. If it's a calculator page, not a scratch pad, it needs to be a calculator page that's talking to your document there. So I really like that idea. Another way is to use the table. Someone in our group mentioned that about using a table. So on Nspire, you hit Control-T to view the table. On 84, you hit second graph to view the table. And again, you can just see the answer in the table very quickly. Scroll to that value. And even on this one of our participants mentioned that the answer has to be positive. I think A, B, and C could be eliminated because when you subtract a negative number, you're subtracting a negative number, you're going to get a positive because that first term has to be positive. You're squaring a negative number. So just another way.
They also said they knew 9 was too small, so that left by 45 had to be the answer.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But even though we only showed you 5 or 6 problems with elimination, I feel like elimination is something you can do on almost every problem on the ACT. Sometimes even when you don't know what the right answer is, you can at least eliminate a few answers, which a lot of students are not taking advantage of that. They're just guessing C when they don't know, or, just kind of, that's 1 out of 5. And so if you can eliminate 2 or 3 answers, your chances are so much better of doing well on this test.
Yeah, some of my students were almost offended when I was showing them like how to find answers without doing math. Like, no, we have to do math.
Right. One way of doing this problem, find the least common denominator, is, use the LCM command. So it won't handle 3 numbers at a time, but it will handle 2 numbers. So on Nspire, if you hit menu number, least common multiple, find the LCM of the first 2 numbers, take that number, and find the LCM with the third number, and you will find the LCM of the problem, which is 2040. So
now,
you can do
I saw
that
you did, when we were practicing, you did one that was kind of embedded. Did that work? Where you did LCM of 15 and 24, comma, 51?
Okay, so let's try that. So let's see, on Nspire, it says math, right arrow 8 to get the command. So LCM of,
and then you did
and now
LCM
I'm going to
again.
embed another one. So math, right arrow 8 of 15, comma, now we're just showing off here, 24.5. parentheses. So that's going to give us our first number, comma, our second number would be 51. And that gives us the answer of 2040. So you actually can do it in one line if you really want to show off to your math friends, your calculator prowess there. Of course, a lot of students really will just work backwards. I mean, don't you think that's such a big strategy in test prep? If you don't know what to do, just start taking the answers and trying them out, right? Like, well, does 51 go into 360? Evidently it doesn't evenly, so that can't be the answer. Maybe test 765, 24 does not go into that one. Test 2040, and if you try all three numbers, they all nicely divide. They're all divisors of 2040. Therefore, of the answer choices, that is the least common multiple, and so it must be the least common multiple. So that's another way of kind of just, working backwards on that problem. A lot of students would do that on that problem, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most typical approach.
Yeah. So solving systems. So maybe your students are good at substitution or elimination, which is great. But if they're not, or they have trouble with that, you can show them how to actually solve a system here on TI-Nspire. So if you press on a TI-Nspire menu, algebra, solve systems, you can actually just type in each system, R plus M equals 5,000, 9.5 R plus 7M equals 38,500. I like that you can change the variables there. That's a really nice feature there. And so we see that the M value there is 3,600, so that must be the answer, even though notice that the number of regular movies would be 1,400 that they attended. So keep that in mind. And
I think that'll typically be one of the answer choices to make sure that students know which variable is which.
No doubt. And on 84, there is a nice solve systems. And if you haven't tried this on the new 84 CE, you need to try it. It works out really nicely. You basically go to the apps key, which is this key right here, and choose Polynomial Simultaneous Solver 2. So number 9 on mine anyway. And you want to go to the second choice, which is Simultaneous Equation Solver. This is kind of a default screen. Usually I just hit the graph key, which activates the next key in the command. And then you type in all your values there, and then hit the graph key again to activate the solve soft key there, and you get your answers. Well, you have to realize that Y is the second one you typed in, which is your matinee in this case. So it gives you the answers pretty quickly, and it's relatively painless to type that in to your calculator there. I kind of like using that sometimes for speed for students, or students who have trouble solving an equation, especially with big numbers and decimals like we have in this one.
That's one that students usually, when they see that, they think that they're cheating or something, but it's an allowed calculator. It's a standard feature on the calculator, so ACT is aware of it.
Yep. This one, I really like students in my class, whenever they type a fraction, really of any kind, I like them to use the fraction template. And so on Nspire, you probably know this. It's in blue above the division key, Control Divide. You get kind of a fraction template. So on Nspire, it kind of looks like this. If you hit Control Divide, you get that kind of template looking thing right there, and then you can type in your fractions. And so you can type this in with fractions just like that, get the answer 49. Also on 84, there's a fraction template. Now there's two ways to get that fraction template to work here. Let me quit that app real quick here. So one way is to hit alpha y equals, which on the older 84s, that will work, and you get your fraction template. But another way, I don't know if you know this, the fast way on Nspire or 84 CE is alpha x. With only 2 clicks, you can get a fraction template. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's amazing. Made me very happy. I don't know why. Maybe I'm strange with my calculator. But that was very nice when I learned you can do that.
Well, they're adding extra ways to get to things so they're easier for students. And they definitely listen to teachers when teachers say, hey, we'd like for the calculator to do this. And
Right.
enough audience for that, they will work on developing a solution.
Right. And so you could use a store command for a problem like this and store a value for C, but another way of doing this is literally just type into your calculator 84 or Nspire just work alike like this. And you're just going to type in different values, and so you just copy and paste the command above. So to get the command above, you just kind of mouse up, and you can access any command you've done, really it has a whole history of commands up above. So it's very easy to access commands up above. And then when you find the command you want, I guess I didn't show that. So let's say I wanted to redo this command. I would press Enter to paste it, and then I can go back and change a value. I can change that to 5 and, try it again. So it's very easy to copy and paste a command. You mouse up, highlight it, press Enter, and then you can change the numbers here. So I did that here and did it 3 times and was able to just on the third strike get the answer there. So it's just a different way of solving. I want to show you different ways of solving problems. This one is probably obvious if you saw this one. Maybe you notice like the K value seems to be the first term here. That will mess some students up. But if you graph this in your calculator, say in Nspire, hit menu, graph trace, and graph trace, you can just kind of mouse to the left until you find the vertex there. It'll say maximum at -1035, and you have the answer of D. At 84, to find the maximum, you probably know that you can use the calculate menu. Second trace in blue is the calculate menu, and you can go to the word maximum, and then just choose a value to the left and to the right of that, and it'll give you the value. Now notice, Mike, do you find this sometimes? It doesn't find it always exactly here, so -9.999, 35. I think I would guess D as the answer there, given that.
Right, and when you're finding roots also, and I tell my students, the calculator's trying really hard to get the right answer and it wants to make you happy, but you just have to know when the calculator's off by a little bit.
Yep, for sure. Another thing that the calculator has is a solver. Usually I tell my students when they see an equation in a problem that's given to us, oftentimes it's just a matter of plugging into the equation. Now, when you plug in here, you really are still missing the H value, which is kind of a difficult one to solve for unless you know how to use logarithms. You can use the solver in Nspire. So there's a solve command, menu, algebra, numerical solve. And you can actually type in the equation, comma, the variable you're solving for. So that comma H is the variable you're solving for. And you get an answer of 10.2. You can take each of these answers, really just H, J, and K there, and evaluate them until you find the same answer there. And so 10.25 must be the answer. Therefore, J must be the answer there. So it'll solve a problem for you. 84 also has a solver. If you've not seen it before on the 84, hit the math key, mouse up one click, and there it is, the numeric solver. And then you would just type in each side of the equation there, hit OK, which is the soft key for graph, hit solve, and it'll solve that problem 10.25. So it's very quick to solve. It's much easier than the old solver. If you have the old 84, you had to do a little bit more work setting the equation equal to 0 first. But really, it's just the left-hand side is the first equation, right-hand side is the second equation, and then you just basically hit the solve key there. So much more user-friendly, I felt like, on the new calculator. And this one, you can just type this one in on either calculator, really. It looks a little different after you press Enter here. We get 13/5, so the correct answer, X plus Y, would be 18 here. Notice that 13 and 5 are both answers. 8 is also an answer, the subtraction between the two. So they're trying to distract you from the real answer there. Mike, you said this was really an interesting problem for you. What happened when you tried to do this problem the first time? Because we don't all, even as teachers, we don't always do it right.
Yeah, the first time I just blew right past the word origin because I'm used to looking for numbers. And so when I was trying, I really struggled with it. And my students, two of them got 35s on this December test, which was ridiculously a hard test. And and they were not ready to see a hyperbola. This was really unusual.
Yeah,
for the test.
for sure. So on this one, a number of different strategies you can use. One is on TI-Nspire, you can use the relation command. So menu, graph entry, relation. You don't have to solve that guy for Y. You can type it in just as it is, and you can see it seems to match exactly what the picture looks like when you type in, I guess that's B there, it looks like, answer choice. For the 84, if you go to the apps and hit the conics, you can choose what type of conic it is. It's a hyperbola. Choose a vertical hyperbola because it's going up and down. It has a picture of that off to the right. Type in that the problem. It is a little bit tougher here in 84. You have to know that 3 divided by 4 there is really, you're dividing by 4/3. So B value is really 1.3 there. That's a little bit tougher to do. But that is how you do that on the 84 there. And just also, I don't know if you probably did this, Mike, when you did this one, at least you can eliminate the answers really quickly there if you know a little bit about hyperbolas, like these last two are ellipses. This one doesn't have the right center. C doesn't seem to have the right center. So the answer right away, you'd at least know it's A or B. Those are probably the two you were struggling with when you saw this for the first time, I imagine.
Right.
And this one, which answers can you eliminate here? Oftentimes they're asking questions like this, and they want you to look for patterns. So maybe you can take your calculator and think, well, 3 to the first is 3, 3 to the second is 9, 3 to the third ends in a 7, 3 to the fourth ends in a 1, 3, 9, 7, and 1. That pattern actually continues, 3, 9, 7, 1, 3, 9, 7, 1, 3, 9, 7, 1, as you go higher and higher with exponents. So A is really a bad answer there. You're never going to have a 1's value of 0. So that answer at least is eliminated. And Mike, this surprised you when I showed this to you, but the Nspire is so powerful, it was able to handle this problem by just typing it in.
Yeah, I didn't think that was very fair.
I mean, that's crazy. Yeah, if you type this in on an 84, 3 to the power of 68, it's not so friendly. It says scientific notation, basically, that rounded off number times 10 to the 32 power. So you really would have to, at that point, go old school and figure out the pattern here, which actually isn't too bad. If you know the patterns 3, 9, 7, 1, every fourth term is going to end with 1. So 68 is divisible by 4. So 1 is the answer there. But still, it's really a nice thing to be able to type it in your calculator. Maybe the ACT didn't realize that the Nspire can handle such gigantic numbers. I'm not sure. On this one, a complex number. And this is the step that you can do to solve this on Nspire. You can actually enter this fraction. So if you divide by 3 plus 2i, if you type that in by hitting the pi key and choosing I there, it actually simplifies it for you, which is really nice. And on the 84CE, it also does that. You just type it in by hitting second decimal point for an I and type it in, it does it. If you have the older 84s, it does not, 84 plus, it does not solve this kind of problem, I don't believe.
And another thing,
yeah.
Depending on your settings, it might give you a decimal output. So that's when you would want to make sure your students know to hit the math, enter to change the decimal fractions.
That's an excellent point. Hey, I'm going to try to save. Michael, I'm going to give you the ball here, and you're going to take over.
Sounds good.
So go ahead and share your screen.
All right, I think we're up. All right, so this next one says factor when possible. It might be a shortcut. And so if you're looking at this and you're able to factor it, you see the x minus 3's go away, and then you get x equals 1. But not everybody.
I mean, it looks like an easy problem when you do it that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's super easy, but not everybody's going to be good at factoring or remember how to factor. You're sometimes freaking out when you're taking the test and you forget some stuff that And so you might say, oh, I can cross multiply. And then you get two answers, and then you got to make sure that you can, which one's right. So hopefully you'd recognize that x minus 3 in the denominator means that's an extraneous solution. You can't use it. Or if you'd plug it back in.
That surprised me. It's only been a couple of years that they put any problems with the extraneous solution on there. Used to be, I never used to see any extraneous solutions on the ACT back in the day. So
there's like 2 is my go-to number for plugging in. Like sometimes I tell students if there's like an ugly algebra question with ugly algebra answers, not like this one, but a different one, plug in 2 and find the match when you plug in 2 to all the answer choices. And if you plugged in 2, it gave you two correct answers on the December test on the one question I'm thinking about. So I'm like, maybe I have to move to using 3 instead now.
Wow.
So then here's where you could plug in answer choices, and you can see one works. So the problem with that is, are you going to go all the way? You're going to start with 4 and get all the way to 1 before you realize it works.
That's a good point.
Really good for students is to say you start with the C or the middle choice, so it's either C or H, and maybe if your answer is too big or too small. How close was it to that? Too big or too small, and you can eliminate half the answer choices with one guess.
That is really nice decision to do sometimes.
So here's one of those ugly algebra ones I was talking about. So maybe you don't remember how to factor, and you could plug in 2. You plug 2 into this answer choice, and plug 2 into the problem, plug 2 into the 3 answer choices, and see which one. Here would be the more mathematical way of solving it, factoring, eliminating the x plus 2. Here's substituting a value of 3 for x. And then you can see that the polynomial, the rational expression is equal to 0. Plug a 4 in for x, and then you can see that, oh, hey, I get 1/2 for both. Now we're going to get into a couple geometry questions. And the idea here is when you see a question mark on a picture, that you really don't have to read much of what's going on because they're going to be asking you to find that question mark right here. That's the question. What is this angle here? And so one idea is to kind of draw a right angle. So if you're really good at drawing right angles, you can go ahead and draw it. A good tip that somebody taught me is that you can trace the corner of your answer sheet, which is a right angle, and that'll be a really good right angle. And then you can compare to that. And looking at that, we probably realize that the first one and the last one are just way too far off, and then we've got it narrowed down from there. And if we can apply some geometry to this situation, we can figure out really that it's going to end in a 6, is what I try to get students to see. And so that it's that middle answer choice. Sorry, we didn't circle that one. Another thing to note is that the figures on the ACT, even though the directions say illustrative figures are not necessarily drawn to scale, over 90% of the time they are drawn to scale. So students who have a good eye for angles and distances can really estimate on these problems. Now this one...
Yeah, so especially if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know the geometry of the problem, that's what the strategy really helps with. So they're not just guessing randomly, I'll guess C, I'll guess whatever, but really take an educated, estimated guess on this.
So on this one, we might look at it and we notice that all the answer choices end in 5, so that doesn't really help us. And hopefully we would know that these 2 angles here are supplementary, and then those 2 are complementary. We can figure it out. But the idea of just, hey, eliminate stuff that is way wrong. And so most people would hopefully look at this and say, that's kind of a small angle, so the 65 would be out, and even the 55 and the 45. So you're down to 25 and 35. I don't know how good people's eyes are for estimating that. You have to either take a guess if we really don't know or then do some math. But the point is we went from a 20% chance 20% chance to a 50% chance just by looking at it a little bit. So here's one. This is another one where students look at this and they go, oh my goodness, this is like a really hard question I did on math class.
Especially the answers are intimidating.
Oh yeah, they're disgusting. So, if you knew your math, you'd recognize this as a side angle side situation where the 45, you find the supplement here is 135. And you know that that's law of cosines, and kind of look at these and say, well, D or E look like the two law of cosines types of answers, and the 45 is wrong because it's outside of the triangle. But using the calculator, if you felt like you had some time to plug this stuff in, you could look at these answers and find which one is reasonable. And by looking at these and knowing that, these two sides are 30 and 100, that the third side has to be less than 130 from the triangle inequality.
Yeah, go back to that. So, yeah, it has to be bigger than, it has to be, that's right. Get right there, yeah. You're right, it has to be smaller than 130, but bigger than 100, don't you think?
Yeah, it's got to be bigger than, So then it's the only one that makes sense here is E.
That's right. And it can't be B because they're also the same, and you're not going to have the same answer. It's kind of interesting. B and C were the same. Anyway, that was interesting.
So then here's another one that those students had trouble with on the December tests. There is going to be a matrix problem. Revised the test back in 2016, and I think every test we've seen since then has had a matrix problem on it.
Wow.
So, sometimes it's just, this one was just, do you know how to set up a matrix to fit a situation? And sometimes they actually have you do some matrix addition or matrix multiplication or a theoretical, which two of these matrices are not able to be multiplied together. Those are the kinds of matrix questions they might ask. And so this one, it was looking at, were things given in the corresponding order of leopard, zebra, and giraffe? And it's going back to the, I think all four of the tests on the ACT are about reading as much as the subject matter. If you look at this, that, leopards are 305, zebras are 408, giraffes are 810, that we could get rid of those first two choices. And then if you actually look at these, you can't multiply those two matrices. And then this one will give you a 1-by-1 matrix, and that one will give you a 3-by-3 matrix. Well, we're looking for a single number, so C has to be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And if you have if you do actually multiply it in your calculator, you see that when you do multiply out, I guess it's B there, you do get 12,700, which if you solve this by hand, some of my students will actually solve this by hand. They got 12,700, and then they figured out which matrix gave them that answer, I guess. Another way of doing it.
The one guy one of my students, he just said, I figured out what the answer was, and then I figured out which answer gave me that. So he did a lot of work. Right.
Okay. It works same way on Inspire. There you go.
So there's the keystrokes for doing it on the Inspire if you're not familiar with setting up. So then words that are italicized are also really important. And this is another one of those problems where, if you've been doing this long enough, you start to see like 10-year-old problems pop back up. And they give us dimensions in feet, and they ask us for an area in square yards. So, so the idea is, we've got 40 square yards. Want to think about like what kind of mistakes do you think students are going to make at this point that ACT might anticipate?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that hard of a problem yet. This was, if I remember right, this was towards the end of the test, this problem.
Yeah, I think so. Is anybody saying anything about this, what they think students might do wrong? So we see the 40, one of the answer choices, but we didn't convert it. Oh, we already converted there. I'm sorry. So if we did 24 times 15, we got 360 square feet. And that one is given as an incorrect answer.
Yeah, Belinda said, they might multiply and then divide by 3.
Right. That's what I think a lot of students are going to do. Oh, 3 feet in a yard, so we'll divide by 3 and we'll get 120. And that's one of our answer choices. So a lot of students feel like the ACT's out to get them. They're out to trick us. And I think sometimes they do some mean things, but if you know your stuff, they're not too bad.
By the way, one participant asked this. They said, wasn't that just a number 24? We renumbered all these problems. So those are our numbering. We just had 25 problems we wanted to go over with y'all. But I know that one was towards the end of the test, which was surprising to me because it was like, doesn't look that hard, but it's tricky more than hard. I think these can be tricky and kind of stinkers if you're not careful.
And that's something to know. I don't know how much familiarity people have with the ACT. The test generally gets harder as you go through the test, but I always encourage my students to get to the end of it because there's stuff, even in the last 10 questions, that's helpful for a lot of students. So they might seem difficult, but if you can kind of filter through whatever mask they're putting on the problem, you can find doable problems. And early in the test, if students are struggling, I say, hey, that's only number 8. You got to remember it's only number 8. It's not going to be that hard. A lot of times students overthink things on the test as well.
Yeah. Gene mentioned the fact that a lot of kids don't really understand area, linear area, square, and cubic area. Like, what that means, square foot, cubic feet, etc. It's not something we do very often in math class. So visually picturing that grid right there helps them understand, like, there are 9 square feet in 1 square yard, which
that's
a lot of
really
kids
good.
Don't quite get.
Yeah, that's a really good visual that you put up there. So let's have everybody think about this one. This is our last problem that we're sharing today. We've got 7 people sitting around a table, and we want to know the probability that 2 people in particular are not going to be sitting next to you. So take a minute and think about that. How would you approach this problem if you were taking a test? You had, on average, 1 minute per question to figure out the correct answer.
While they're working on this, Mike, one thing that I see often on this test is usually with the probability questions, they keep it on the easier side. Like the harder concepts, like logarithms, probability, they keep the question kind of on the easy side. I thought this was one of the toughest probability problems I've seen on this test. I thought it was pretty challenging.
I think it's hard. If you draw a picture like the one I'm about to show, I think it's not so bad. The one that blew me away over the last few years since they revamped it in 2016 was when they asked a standard deviation question. They gave you 5 sets of number, and they said which one had the smallest standard deviation. And then they asked a expected value question. I was floored. Expected value. I couldn't believe that one.
Yeah, they're doing a lot more expected value for sure.
So I saw one
So
person.
what'd you come up with this one? What's your picture look like?
There's the picture. So what I did was I drew seven boxes representing seats, and then I put one of the people's initial in one of the boxes, and I said, well, nobody can sit. Terry can't sit here, and Terry can't sit here. So there are 4 places that Terry can sit that are not next to Mason, and then there are 6 places that he could have sat because Mason was already sitting somewhere. And I reduced it to 2/3.
Yeah, I guess if you draw it like that, it's not so bad. Did any of the participants actually use combinations to solve this? I think it's possible.
Another comment pop up, but I didn't see it. I had to actually look this up.
Okay, what'd you come up with?
So you have to use factorials, and it's the number of people at the table minus 1 factorial minus the rest of the people factorial times 2 people that are sitting next to each other factorial divided by, since it's probability, all divided by that 6 factorial. And here it is. That's what it looks like on the Inspire, and then also on the 84. And on the 84, if you're an 84 user, I think they added an extra menu over the years. They used to just be able to go backwards 1 to get to the probability menu. Now you have to go backwards twice, but backwards faster than forwards 3 times for me. I still like that.
Hey, Mike, one of the participants asked if you could show that picture again that you had drawn.
Yeah, totally. There it is.
And by the way, I think another participant said this, and I think it's great. These would be great problems to start or end your class with, like an exit ticket, or maybe start the class with. Again, they're all very instructive. They're all very typical of recent ACT type of problems you might see on the test. And that's one of the reasons we want to give you some materials that you could use in your classroom. And now you have a chance to talk about strategies, with them, and not just, what's the right answer, but how could you do this 2 or 3 different ways sometimes?
And I think that's, definitely having students share their different experiences with the problems of how they can find a correct answer.
Yeah. So we hope this has been helpful for you. We enjoyed it, and we thank you for coming to our session.